Chapter 13. An Uninvited Guest. The fact that the Killicow was just as surprised as I was at our meeting probably saved my life. We both froze and stared at each other. Likely, if it was one of the two residents of the peak, the attack would have come much quicker. In that brief second, I had the chance to evade my imminent death. Unarmed and vulnerable, I would have been easy prey for the mighty creature, but in its confusion and curiosity, it delayed its attack. I lunged backwards, putting the nest between me and the bird. Its massive head shot towards me, intent on spearing me with its formidable beak. I leaned into my backwards momentum and created even more distance between us. But now the bird had its wits back, and knew that I was an impostor worth destroying as well. In one powerful jump, it cleared the top of the spire, twisting in the air as it soared over my head and jabbing down at me with its talons. Again it missed, and I dived low near the bottom of the nest, scrambling as fast as I could and pulling at its branches. I squirmed my way under it. I could almost feel the beak of the monster as it tried over and over again to pierce me. It was unsuccessful in its attack, which only made it more wild with frenzy. It began rending the nest in its madness, flinging bits of branches and feathers in every direction. It seemed to forget its original purpose and was solely focused on killing me. Abruptly, I felt the ground beneath me fall away. I realized that I must be over the top of the chute that rose from the base of the pinnacle. I shimmied my whole body over the edge so that my legs were dangling down its maw while my hands held onto the rim. Above me, the Killicow kept up its mission of destruction when suddenly there was an incredibly loud screech. For 1 second, the Killicow froze, and then the other two Killically smashed in on top of it, bowling it over to the side and away from the eggs. While their original battle that I had witnessed earlier was ferocious, the one that happened right above my head was earth-shattering. Death was going to be the only outcome of this one, and not just for the invading bird. I wasn't sure that I was going to get away now either. In desperation, I looked down to see how far it was to the bottom. That's when I saw it. Hanging from a small jut in the rock was a purple pouch on a gold thread. It hung there just 3 feet below the rim of the chute. Before I even had time to consider the consequences, I let go with my left hand and reached down to grab the pouch. In that same instant, the nest shifted violently above me and knocked my right hand free from its hold, and I began to fall. At the last possible second, my hand closed on the pouch, and I fell straight down the center of the chute. It took only a couple of seconds. There was no time to even think about what would happen when I hit the bottom. I barely had enough time to close my eyes and brace myself when I landed smack in the middle of the accumulated pile of Killicow droppings. I went down into it up to my chest before my downward momentum ceased. As disgusting as it was, it probably saved my life. I could still hear the raging of the 3 birds 50 feet above me. Fear gripped me anew as I tried unsuccessfully to pull myself out of the mire. But then all at once 2 massive arms reached in to help. It was Bog. There was a revolting sucking sound as the droppings lost their stubborn battle to let me go, and I came free. Bog and I rolled out onto the open ground in front of the peak. We knew we weren't out of trouble yet. Without a word, we sped towards the cover of the underbrush. We didn't have to worry too much as a melee was still going on between the Killically. Carol met us, and although there was relief and concern in his eyes, he was also laughing. "Taryn, I'm happy to see you, but I can't say that I'm happy to smell you. What happened?" "Not yet," I panted, and the 3 of us left the warring creatures behind as we hurried away from Deck's Peak as fast as we could. We ran for a good 1.5 miles before we finally came to a stop, winded and cheering. Carol collapsed to the ground and, holding his side, pointed at me. "Seriously, Taryn, what happened?" "I got it," I said triumphantly as I held up the pouch. I relayed my encounter on the top of the peak, including the discovery of the pouch and the fall into the muck. "Well, that explains why the Killicow I was keeping occupied suddenly broke off its pursuit of me. I thought you were a goner." Bog's explanation of his battle with his Killicow was similar to Carol's, as was his concern for me. He heard me cry out as I fell down the chute and had rushed to the opening of the base where he found me. Then they wanted to see the pouch. "But we need to get you cleaned up soon," snorted Carol. "Whew, you're ripe." "Ugh, you're not kidding," I grimaced. Now that the adrenaline from the encounter with the Killically was starting to ebb, I became intensely aware of the mess that was all over me. It was in my shoes and covered my legs. It was under my arms and even in my hair. My fingers looked like they had webs between them. We found a stream a little ways farther on, and I waded in, clothes and all. It was cold, but it felt good to get myself clean again. While I was bathing, Bog and Carol started to prepare our campsite. Even though it was still early in the afternoon, we felt that we had accomplished enough for one day. When I got out of the stream, there was a welcoming fire blazing. I stripped off my clothes, and after wrapping myself in a blanket, hung them over some branches to dry them, and then joined their brothers in some dinner. "Let's see the stone," said Kirill. I opened the pouch and dumped the single stone into the palm of my hand. It looked so innocent and plain lying there that I could hardly believe it was a thing of power. If it wasn't for the fact that Bourne was so specific about its location, I wouldn't have given it a second glance. "So what does it do?" asked Kirill. "I'm not totally sure," I replied. Jack didn't seem to understand the stones either. "I think it can grant certain wishes." "Can it tell us where the other stones are?" "I don't know. I could try." I held the stone in my hand and closed my eyes. I concentrated deeply on finding the second stone, but nothing happened. I focused even harder on the stone, and still nothing happened. "What if it isn't one of the stones?" Kirill asked. "Well, let me try something else." I concentrated on another wish. There was a pause, and then, all of a sudden, Kirill let out an exclamation of surprise and grabbed his arm. "What did you do?" he asked. "Did it work?" I countered. "Did what work?" "Check your arm." He peeled off the bandage that he had wrapped below his elbow, where he had been slashed a couple of days before. There was no longer any wound. "Ha!" I cheered. "It worked! You're all better!" Kirill felt it all around his elbow. He held it up to Bog, who looked it over as well. "That's incredible," he said. "So I guess that answers that. Now what else shall we do with it?" "I don't know," I replied. "I'm concerned that if I use it, it might give our presents away to Jack." "Better to keep it secret," said Bog. I agreed and placed it in the pouch. As I hung the pouch around my neck, I examined it closely. I wonder how Bourne hid it up there. "I was thinking the same thing," replied Kirill. "Would have loved to heard that story." That got us all thinking about Bourne. We had been without him for almost 2 days now, and it still felt like he could come around the corner and join us at any time. We hadn't talked about him since he died, but by some unspoken agreement, we all seemed ready to talk about him now. "How did he come to adopt you?" I asked. In his slow, ponderous way, Bog relayed the story of how he had been adopted when he was only 2 years old. Bog's mother's name was Jorn. She was very special. She had strong magic, and there were some cruel giants that wanted to harness that power for their own evil purposes. They captured and killed Bog's father, Prit, but Bog's mother was able to escape. However, before disappearing, she entrusted Bog to Bourne, who was a very dear friend of both her and her late husband. No one had ever heard or seen her since. That was more than 20 years ago. "Bourne is the only father I've ever known," Bog concluded heavily. Kirill's story was quite different. He had been with Bourne and Bog for only 14 years. Bourne had found him out on the Kodesh Mountains on one of his forays. Kirill was wandering aimlessly, hungry and lost. "How old were you?" I asked. "I was about 12 or 13. I never thought I would live beyond those days." "Where did you come from?" "I don't know. I couldn't remember anything that happened before the morning I woke up all alone in the mountains. I knew my name, but that was about it. I remember being so frightened of Bourne when I first saw him. He looked so huge, but he was very kind to me and offered me food. He brought me down into the valley with him. I think he wanted to find a friend for Bog, and being only 3 or 4 years apart, it seemed like a perfect match. I've never wished for anything else since." They shared stories of growing up together, of Bourne's incredible hunting skills and his kind and generous nature. They talked a bit about my father and about Cree. Sometimes Father would stop in to pay a visit, though most of the meetings with the Guardians happened away from the house. They told of the many times when they must have driven Bourne crazy with their wild antics, and how at the end of almost every day, Bourne would sit them down to make sure there was peace between them. The conversation carried on for most of the afternoon. We laughed a lot, and tears were shed as they recalled many moments in their lives together. By late afternoon, my clothes were dry and I was able to get dressed again. When I came back from changing, the conversation had shifted to talk about what lay before us. We still had to find Shender Marsh, and once there, we didn't know how long it would take to find the second stone. We tried to imagine what was so terrible about the place. Bourne had told us very little, which made it impossible for us to prepare ourselves sufficiently. "What if there are ghosts there?" I asked. "Well, if they still have to relieve themselves like they did when they were alive, you could always find their dumping spot and sneak through there," Kirill teased. "That's very funny," I countered defensively, but I still laughed at what happened back at Deck's Peak. "The only problem," Kirill went on, "is that they'd smell you all the way to Jack's castle, and the element of surprise would be gone." Even Bog was laughing now. "But maybe that would be to our advantage," Kirill continued, now in a roll. "They might all die from the stench, and then we could just waltz in there and take what we needed. Problem solved." "Enough already," I finally said as I wiped the tears from my eyes. "I don't think it'll be that easy." "Yeah, you're probably right." We chuckled a bit more at the absurdity of Kirill's suggestion. When the laughter faded away, I continued on. Have either of you ever been in the castle before? Neither of them had. I wonder how we're going to get in, find the stone, and get out without getting caught, without having a clue as to where we're going. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, said Bog encouragingly. One step at a time. His words, really, were the only option we had, and I was just about to tell him when we heard a crack as a branch broke in the forest behind us. We all went still as stone and listened. Dead silence filled the air. Our eyes met, and Kirill used hand gestures to indicate that Bog should circle around to the right and me to the left while he moved directly towards the source of the sound. He held up 3 fingers and counted us down. 3, 2, 1, go. We sprang to our feet and headed each in our assigned directions, Kirill bellowing out a challenge as he drove straight into the trees. The pursuit didn't last long. The thing that made the sound was obviously just as tightly wound by the silence as we had been. Its primary focus was on the hollering Kirill, and it bolted to its left, right into Bog's massive arms. There was a brief struggle, but the creature was no match for Bog's strength. Bog dragged our prey back into the clearing. It was another giant, unarmed and obviously terrified. However, after our encounter a couple of nights ago, we were in no mood to take any chances. Kirill returned a few minutes later after having searched a little farther to see if the giant was alone or not. He stormed into the clearing, a knife in his hand, and strode right up to the giant. "Who are you?" he yelled menacingly, pressing the knife against the giant's neck. I'm Vosh," the giant stuttered. I don't mean any harm." "Really?" countered Kirill. "Then what were you doing spying on us?" "I wasn't spying," the giant pleaded. "I saw your fire and I was cold and hungry and came to see if you were friend or foe." "How long have you been hiding back there? What did you hear?" "I'd only been standing there for a few moments. I heard something about a castle, and I think you said something about someone named Jack. If so, I have information that might help." "What do you know about Jack?" I blurted out. "He's the one who appeared in Terrace just over 2 weeks ago. He overthrew the king and is now gathering the giants for some far-fetched plan of revenge against the humans." "How do you know all this?" I demanded. "I was there when he arrived before the king. I served King Pelt as a counselor, and when Jack came and demanded the throne, I urged the king not to relent. I underestimated Jack's power. The king's refusal was met with a swift and terrible force. He collapsed immediately from his throne and was dead before he hit the ground. Jack continued his violent display by destroying the rest of the king's advisors and entourage that were in the throne room that day." "And yet, here you are," Kirill said accusingly. "I only just managed to escape and have been on the run ever since. Please, you must believe me. And if you're going to the castle to fight Jack, I can be of great help to you. I overheard you say that none of you have been there before, right? I know the castle well. I can help you find whatever you're looking for." Kirill, Bog, and I exchanged glances. Kirill shook his head. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, this Vosh could be the enemy sent to spy on us. His knowledge seemed a little too convenient. On the other hand, he could be telling the truth, and assistance would be a great advantage to us. "Let him go," I said to Bog. Vosh crumpled to the ground as Kirill stepped away in disgust. I beckoned Bog and Kirill to join me as I walked off some distance away. "We can't trust him, Terran," whispered Kirill harshly. "Not out here. Not after what happened the other night." "I know," I replied, "but if he's telling the truth, how else are we going to find our way around the castle?" "Don't do it," Kirill persisted. "We'll find another way." "What do you think, Bog?" I asked. Bog let out a sigh, a habit I'm sure he picked up from Boren. "I don't know," he said, glancing back at Vosh, who was still sitting on the ground where we left him. "Do we have to decide right now?" "What do you mean?" "He can stay with us for a few days. We still have many miles to go and not a few challenges ahead of us. Maybe we could watch him and learn more about him. If by the time we get near the castle we don't think we can trust him, we can decide what to do then." I looked at Kirill, whose eyes were fixed on the ground between us. We stood there for a few moments in silence. It hit me that they were both waiting on me to make the final decision. "Fine," I said at last. "He can travel with us, but we all watch him closely, and any time he does anything that confirms our fears, he's finished." With that I walked back to Vosh and told him our decision. "Thank you," he said with obvious relief. "I promise you, you won't regret it." Kirill again checked him for weapons, and confident that the newcomer would do no harm, we offered him some food. The moments of remembrance that we had been enjoying only a short while ago were completely wiped out by this new turn of events. We went to sleep under the stars again that night, and while I was confident that Vosh couldn't hurt us, I still slept fitfully, waking several times. Every time I did, I could see that he was asleep next to the fire, apparently content that he would be allowed to join us. I still wasn't convinced that he was for us, but I was confident that neither Bog nor Kirill would give him the slightest chance to act against us if he wasn't.